In this video, we'll take a look at a very important dynamic in Total War Rome 2, and that is the dynamic of spears versus swords. Swords are infantry killers. The reason for that is that they on average have a high melee attack, good weapon damage, decent melee defense and armor. This isn't true for all swords, but on average. At least match for price with spears. Now what you'll notice is that the thorax hoplites both have a lower melee attack and weapon damage than the principe. So the principe have 47 melee attack, 35 weapon damage. The thorax hoplites have 34 melee attack and 30 weapon damage. And what that means is that principe are going to be hitting their enemies more often than these thorax hoplites are going to be hitting their enemies. And that together with the higher damage is what makes the difference in infantry engagements. Now, the armor of the thorax hoplites is higher than the armor of the principe, 75 versus 90. But the way armor works in this game is that a proverbial dice is rolled, or a calculation is made. I guess that's a more accurate way of saying it. A calculation is made against the enemy armor. If a successful hit lands, then the weapon damage being 30 base and 5 armor piercing, 5 armor piercing damage is always going to be applied, while the 30 base damage is going to be checked against the 90 armor of the thorax hoplites. So on a roll of 1 to 30, that's the amount of damage that's going to be subtracted by the base damage. And on a roll of 31 to 90, all of the base damage is ignored, but the armor piercing damage is not ignored. And sword infantry, on average, being able to hit spear infantry more, is going to pile up the armor piercing damage and potentially the base damage as well. Now these thorax hoplites are very good hoplites, because they have, let's see if I can select them, well, they have 30 weapon damage, which is high for a spear unit. They also have higher amount of armor piercing, so they're going to be doing more armor piercing damage per hit, but they're going to be hitting less often. You can also see that their melee defense of 59 is higher than the melee defense of the principe. Another fairly substantial difference between at least hoplites, this isn't true for barbarian spears, but at least hoplites, they do not throw javelins on the charge. And the javelins thrown on the charge by these principe will do 32, might do 32 damage. It will do 12 armor piercing damage if it gets past the shields of the thorax hoplites. And then it will do 20 base damage if 0 damage is blocked, but the thorax hoplites have a fairly good chance of ignoring that. So already on the charge here, the thorax hoplites have taken damage. Now as this battle progresses, the damage done on the thorax hoplites is going to help these principe kill more thorax hoplites. So even though these principe are cheaper than the thorax hoplites, they're going to stack up very well against them, and that is mainly because they have a higher melee attack and they have a higher weapon damage. And this is true when you match up most sword infantry against most spear infantry. So the usefulness in spear infantry mostly lies in their bonus against large, because the bonus against large is going to increase both the melee attack and the damage done against large units on spears. So spears match up very well against cavalry, but they match up poorly against infantry. So these thorax hoplites are going to have a weapon damage of potentially 45 against large units, but the important thing to note with the bonuses against large is that the bonus damage is always applied. It's like armor piercing in that regard. So you're guaranteed to be doing a lot of damage with each hit, even against heavily armored enemy cavalry units. And this is why it's problematic in many cases to have a main line consisting of spears against enemy sword factions, because the thorax hoplites or other spear units are going to stack up very poorly indeed against units that are even cheaper than they are on the charge. Even though the charge bonus is better on the thorax hoplites, these principe are getting a comfortable lead on the thorax hoplites, And you can see that the Thorax Hoplites are losing the combat. Now, Thorax Hoplites have an ability. They can go into Hoplite Phalanx, and one of the hidden abilities in the unit database is that Hoplites that go into Phalanx get a bonus against infantry of 5, and it increases their melee defense and armor, so they become even more tankier, and they have the potential to do more damage against sword infantry. But the Phalanx will still not, on average, allow them to defeat similarly priced sword infantry on the charge. Sword infantry kills spear infantry kills cavalry. So if you know you're going up against sword heavy faction, going for a spear line might not be the best idea. If you do, you're going to have to need other units to kill the swords for you. So elephants could work, chariots could work, elite skirmishers could work, cavalry could work. But one-on-one match for price, spears are going to lose to swords, and that is mainly because of the higher melee attack and the higher weapon damage of the swords. So that's it. In the current meta of the game, where sword infantry is very common, then bringing a lot of spears usually isn't effective, and that is kind of why you want to go as cheap on the spears as you can, and that is why Levy Freemen are so great. They still have a fantastic bonus against large units, and they throw javelins. So the Principe were able to defeat a more expensive unit of Thorax Hoplites with 91 kills, and the Thorax Hoplites only killed 52 Principe. But of course the Hoplites would have done a lot better had they charged in and then used Hoplite Phalanx, but they would still have lost to the Principe and to similarly priced sword units. Main reason being melee attack and weapon damage. Strength and honor.